All right, so beautifuls, we you know, in this step that we're at right now, which is step 4, which is releasing, transforming significant emotional events and trauma, right, and living decisions. Especially, you know, the timeline scanner sweep and then the trauma model. They're really big techniques, really big, especially the trauma model. So while we are working with big techniques, you know, timeline therapy is also a really big technique in itself. Negative emotions 1, negative emotions 2, they're all really big techniques. They're really, really powerful. And what I want to bring to your attention here is what you'll find in this section. We do, you know, there's big technique here, as well as releasing limiting decisions and limiting beliefs, that you'll find that at the end of this technique, especially the trauma model, phobia model, is we finish it up, because it's a big technique, we finish it up and close it in and kind of seal it shut with some smaller techniques. And you get to decide which of those techniques are going to be really powerful and the ones to use depending on your client and depending on what you're presented with. You may decide that, you know, you've identified some limiting decisions. Like when there's trauma, there's always a limiting decision inside of that. There's always limiting decisions inside of the trauma that we've experienced and created at the unconscious level. And so limiting decisions technique, timeline therapy, limiting decisions technique is a really powerful technique to use. You may decide that you want to use the Submodalities belief change for that as well, which is totally doable and different because we're working with submodalities. And sometimes it's just what they need. But as you practice this more and as you trust yourself more, you're going to realize, you know, you get to play around with it a little bit as well. And you get to experiment and see what's going on and understand how your client works and how they think and how they operate, all those things. So you'll begin to, and you can already start to do this now, really trust yourself in figuring out what it is that you need when you need it. The Submodalities belief change, we didn't actually do. But I most likely would have talked through it. So the power of a Submodalities belief change is that we're not getting learnings different to timeline therapy limiting decisions. We're actually completely changing the charge on that limiting decision through submodalities. And submodalities are so powerful. So powerful. Think about it. Think about the pictures that you have, the voices in your head, the things that you say to yourself. Like all of these have submodalities within them, right? They're the subsets of the modalities, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. So even though we pretty much use timeline therapy limiting decisions for most limiting decisions and beliefs now, there's times when a belief change script, submodalities belief change, is really handy, really powerful, and can be a good little like technique to close off something. So it's a good one to be used potentially after if you've done a sweep and you're changing, identifying some limiting decisions inside of trauma, then it's definitely a good technique. It's pretty straightforward. The script's there on page 115. And you've got your Submodalities checklist. Don't know if you can see this. On page 116. So it's not so clear. But yeah, that's 116. 115. So yeah, I mean the script says it all. It's can you think of a limiting belief? So if you already have the limiting belief or the limiting decision, then that goes in column number 1. And then as you think of that, do you have a picture? As you think of not good enough, or as you think of being not loved, unloved, do you have a picture? And then you'll elicit the submodalities of that in column number 1. Number 2 is, can you think of a belief which is no longer true? And an example is if you were a smoker, you once believed that you were a smoker and you now no longer are. Or perhaps it was a belief that you were 15 and you now once believed that you were 15 and now you know you don't. So it's a, you know, whatever works, but it's a belief that you once had that was true for you, absolutely true, and now is no longer true. And as you think of that belief now that is now no longer true, do you have a picture? And then you elicit that picture in number 2. And as it says there, best results location should be different. Location is always a powerful driver. So location, the further away that you have the location, the better. Higher chances, higher guarantee that you're going to have a greater success with the technique when using submodalities. So then what you do is you change the submodalities of number 1, which is the living decision, living belief, into the submodalities of number 2, and you make that belief no longer true now. How good is that? By changing those submodalities. And then you can check in and say, how do you feel about that old belief? If it works, great. If it's powerful, great. If it's not, what do you do? Then you just get a different belief that's no longer true. Maybe that one wasn't powerful enough. So that's that. And then step 4 actually on the script is, can you think of a belief that is absolutely true? You could use a universal belief like knowing the sun's going to come up tomorrow. You could believe, one that, green means go, red means stop, either of those. Or it could just be, a belief that, you believe you're a female or a male. And so as you think of that belief, do you have a picture? And then in column 3, you'll elicit the submodalities of that picture. And then you go to step 5 and you say, can you think of a belief that you want to have, which is going to be the opposite of the belief that they had that they didn't want to have anymore. So of number 1, right, their living decision, living belief, and it's going to be the opposite of that. So let's say we're working with I'm unloved, is I'm totally loved. And this will be number 4 in column number 4. And then you'll say, as you think of that belief, do you have a picture? And then you elicit the submodalities of that picture. Number 6 is then you change the submodalities of the last one, which was in column 4, into the submodalities that are in column 3. So what you're doing is you're changing the submodalities of the belief that they want to have, of I am totally loved, into the same submodalities of a belief that is absolutely true. Magic, right? So that's that. And then you test and you say, what do you believe now? And why do you believe that you have this new belief? How is that possible that you now have this new belief? If we take out the word why. So that's a beautiful technique, a beautiful small technique to kind of seal things off when needed. And I wanted to just run through that so you have that. We've also got the submodalities swish pattern script there, which again is a part of the process. When you're actually running through the trauma model or the phobia model, you're actually going to finish off with a swish pattern, and that's kind of part of the process there to, again, have a nice little small technique to seal it in. Amazing. So point of resolution is also another technique that is like a small technique that is a reframe. It's really, again, using submodalities to be able to take the client from remembering a time when they had resolution about something, right? And versus something where they didn't have resolution, and it's just basically a mapping across. So it's really important that ecology in the point of resolution is really important piece, as it says at the top. You need to make sure that you've done timeline therapy and the negative emotions 1 and 2, and that there's no negative emotions left on the root cause event, and also that you've cleaned up the significant emotional events as well. Also, the 3 requisites for change need to be applied. If the person is not taking responsibility, they're not focusing on what they want, they're not taking action, then this is not recommended to even use this technique. So they have to be really, really responsible, focusing on what they want, taking action, moving towards what it is that they want. And yeah, it says here, in some cases, when people experience significant emotional events of a dramatic or a traumatic nature, during the event, the unconscious mind takes a snapshot, right? And it makes a map of the submodalities of that event, including an AD component with that. And from there on, whenever something similar happens, the colors, the brightness, any of those visual submodalities, even the sounds, like the tonality of voice, the words, smells, tastes, all of that, the unconscious mind gets back into that emotional state that's related to that original significant emotional event. And this is for the purpose of warning the conscious mind to be on alert, right? To be on alert, on safety, making sure that they're safe. So even if the original event is free of the negative emotions after you do timeline therapy, the submodalities can remain imprinted on the unconscious mind's memory of the event, and they can re-trigger this whole chain of emotions. Therefore, they need to be changed. Right, and this is the power of this process here, especially at the completion of what we've just done, the trauma. So once the event is clean, or once the entire past is clean, meaning there's no more negative emotions on the specific event, no more negative emotions on their past in this case, then you can do the following. You elicit the submodalities of that point of resolution of think about it. Have you ever had something that's bothered you that now no longer does? It's a great way to think of it. And so you got to a point of resolution with that thing. So for me, I was very angry with my father for a long period of time. And I got to a point where I was like, so done with it. Forgive him, let it go, so done. And it was this point of resolution that I got complete with that situation. And so it bothered me before, but when I got to this point, it no longer bothered me. And so I was complete with it. I didn't have any negative charge around it. I didn't have any negative anything to do with it. And so yeah, I didn't know timeline therapy at that time. I didn't have any intervention. I was just done with it. So you all have something like that, right? May not be with your father, but it can be in anything. Could be anything small, big, whatever. Could be that someone, banged into your car and you were so pissed off with them, and then you were just like, everything happens for a reason and it's all good, whatever, it's just a car. And so you got to this point of resolution and you're like so good with it. So you've been able to do that in your life, right? So that's an example of an event where you would use that, because this is an event that happened that you got to a point of resolution within that event. So again, as a reminder, it can be something super, super duper small, super small. The important point is to have this point of resolution, and then we elicit the submodalities of that particular event. So with my father, then if I was the client, I would say to my client, so remember when you got to that point of resolution with your father in that specific event, as you think of that, do you have a picture? And then we elicit the submodalities of that picture of the resolution and how they felt and all of that. So then we elicit the submodalities of the original event and also of the trigger event. And then we map across the submodalities of the original event into the trigger event. So let's say we're in this situation, right, when we've just done the trauma model, and a client, this client could have thought about, triggered back into a state where they didn't have resolution in the past, right? They didn't have resolution with this particular event that they could think about, and it could trigger a certain response in them. So whatever that event is for them, that they could have been triggered into a certain response previously, right? They could have thought about a particular event or seen something or did something, and it would trigger back that event. Then we're going to elicit the submodalities of that response, right? That event and how they would respond, the trigger of how they would respond in that. And we would elicit the submodalities of the trigger. And then we map across the submodalities. So then we would be turning the submodalities of the resolution. We want to be turning the submodalities of the ones where they're triggered and not in the state that they want to be in. We would turn those submodalities into that of number one. So let's say column number one is the submodalities of the point of resolution. Column number two is still being in a triggered state, not having resolution. Just like when you did like to dislike, remember that? And you would change the submodalities of the food that they liked into the food that they disliked. It's the same thing. So you're changing the submodalities of the trigger event into the submodalities of the point of resolution, and you're just doing that complete mapping across. So it's tools that you've used before, you've done before, you've learned. Now it's just applying it into an actual point of resolution. So once you do the mapping across, then it will bring a point of resolution into the event that they used to have. And especially after you've done this, like once you've done this, after you've run the trauma model and the submodalities as well, it's really, really beautiful closure and completion to that whole process. And so that is the point of resolution. Awesome.